what they've been looking for is over there, and what a man look for is on his nose all the time. I can only tell you where I've been. I can only guess about where I'm going and hoping that if I go up high enough, I'll see the light.
At 91 years old, Bobby Rush is living a tragic life for choosing violence over virtue. The deals, the street wars, the bodies he left behind climbing to the top of the Chitlin Circuit.
I don't know why. I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't get high. I don't know why. It was all around me. I went in the room where guy had package stacked up. Some blood, come on, it's free. Not for me. I don't know what happened.
Then, his son died at 18. His 3 other children gone to sickle cell anemia, and his first wife taken by the same disease, while enemies from his blood-soaked past hunted him like a wounded animal. By the last funeral, the king of the Chitlin Circuit stood alone. His empire crumbled, surrounded by empty seats and ghosts of everyone his violence destroyed. Now the truth is out, and it's uglier than we ever imagined. So, let's get into it. Born Emmett Ellis Jr. in 1933 in rural Louisiana, Bobby Rush was the son of a minister father whose guitar and harmonica playing provided early musical influences. But this wasn't some heartwarming story of family musical traditions.
When she got out of the sight of the store and the people are looking, she said, now come on up here, boy, and I sat with her. But in the meantime, I was a babysitter. She was babysitting me.
This was about a black child in Depression-era Louisiana, learning that survival required becoming something you weren't supposed to be. His mixed-race mother could pass for white when needed. She'd leave young Bobby in the back of the wagon, denying her own son to access stores that would serve white customers. When they were safely away from prying eyes, she'd invite him back up front. This wasn't love. This was tactical survival in the Jim Crow South. The family existed in a strange racial limbo that prepared Bobby for a lifetime of code switching and adaptation. He dropped out of school at age 11, not by choice, but by necessity. His father needed him to work, to contribute, to become a man before he'd even figured out how to be a boy.
But I was proud. Had my chest stuck out. You mean tell me I don't have to go to school? I can come out of school and play and do whatever while the other kids in school, not knowing that coming out of school is work. He said, I want you to get a job down at Mr. Burgess' gin.
What Bobby thought was freedom turned into a nightmare of child labor. His father got him a job at the local cotton gin for $3 a week, but that wasn't the real job. The real job was espionage.
I went to work in the gin. My job was to get information. When the white guy was sitting around the table in the gin and wanted to bring me all the information.
At 11 years old, Bobby Rush was gathering market intelligence from white farmers to help his father's black congregation avoid economic exploitation. He was already learning that success meant listening, watching, and playing roles that others couldn't detect. Music became his escape, but even that was built on deception. By his teens, he was donning a fake mustache and playing at local juke joints, fascinated by the enthusiasm of the crowds. The mustache wasn't just a disguise. It was a symbol of how early Bobby learned that authenticity was a luxury he couldn't afford. By 1953, Bobby had made it to Chicago, the promised land for blues musicians. In Chicago, he met and befriended Little Walter and Muddy Waters, who lived nearby. Little Walter got him a job at a club called Skins, where they played behind a curtain for a white audience. Apparently, they built the curtain so his white audience couldn't see this black man. Bobby was the first artist they had, so he built a curtain. The curtain was worse than segregation. It was musical apartheid. White audiences wanted to consume black culture without confronting black humanity. Bobby was good enough to entertain them, but not human enough to be seen.
I took a bow. They hit the curtain open like that. I took a bow. They closed the curtain right back up. And it was that boo. They booed me.
When the curtain finally opened and white patrons saw a black man, they booed. Not because of his music. They'd been enjoying that all along. They booed because of his skin color. The club owner's solution? 2 curtains. Bobby visible in front, his black band hidden behind another curtain. This wasn't just professional humiliation, it was the systematic degradation of human dignity wrapped in economic opportunity. Bobby took the work because he needed the money, but the psychological cost was devastating. The Chicago dream was rotting from the inside. His upbeat and often provocative live shows established him as a favorite among Southern soul and blues audiences. But success in the black community didn't translate to mainstream acceptance. He was trapped between 2 worlds, too funky for traditional blues purists, too black for white mainstream success. By the 1970s, Bobby had found his sound, a funk-infused blues he called folk funk. In the early 1970s, a song he wrote, Chicken Heads, released by Galaxy, became his breakout record after being picked up from a small label. It reached number 1, 34 on the Billboard R&B chart in 1971. Chicken Heads should have been his breakthrough moment. Instead, it became a tale about the music industry's exploitation of black artists. The song was his composition, his performance, his breakthrough, but the profits went everywhere except to him. The industry had systems designed to keep artists like Bobby dependent. The analytic structure determined who deserved opportunities based on data that reflected historical exclusion, not actual talent. It was a perfect catch-22. You need visibility to prove you have an audience, but you need an audience to get visibility. While other blues artists got major label deals and promotional machines, Bobby became an entrepreneur out of necessity. He achieved renown for his entrepreneurial flair by working multiple gigs the same night and sometimes collecting double pay by disguising himself as an MC at his own shows. He also booked and promoted many shows himself rather than working through an agency.
And I'm making $1,000 a night in my restaurant. It almost put me out of business of entertainment because I have a restaurant now doing $3,000 or $4,000 a week in my restaurant.
The restaurant was both salvation and near destruction. Bobby was making more money flipping barbecue than performing the blues that had consumed his life. His family begged him to abandon music entirely. For a moment, it seemed like the responsible choice. But he suffered burns in a fire at his BBQ restaurant. Another reminder that every path came with its own dangers. The fire wasn't just property damage. It was symbolic destruction of his attempt to find security outside music. The personal tragedies started early and never stopped. Rush has been married at least twice. His first wife and 3 children all died from sickle cell anemia. Sickle cell anemia, a genetic blood disorder that primarily affects people of African descent, turned Bobby's family into a medical tragedy. In the 1960s and 70s, sickle cell anemia was essentially a death sentence, particularly for black families who lacked access to adequate health care. The disease causes red blood cells to become misshapen, blocking blood flow and causing excruciating pain episodes called crises. For Bobby, watching his children suffer through these episodes was torture beyond anything the music industry had inflicted on him. The first child died young, then the second, then the third. Each death was prolonged, each one a months-long process of hope, followed by medical decline. Bobby would perform at night, rushing home between sets to sit beside hospital beds, holding hands that grew weaker with each visit. His wife, also battling the same genetic curse, became increasingly frail as she watched her children slip away one by one. The medical bills were catastrophic. Insurance barely existed for diseases affecting predominantly black populations, and experimental treatments weren't covered at all. Bobby found himself choosing between paying for his family's medical care and maintaining his music career. Studio time, instrument maintenance, promotional expenses. Everything took a backseat to endless doctor visits and prescription costs.
My daughter passed. My 3 sister-in-law passed. Then my next daughter passed. My son passed.
Death didn't come once or twice. It came in systematic waves, stripping away every personal connection Bobby had built. 3 sister-in-laws, 3 children, then his wife, an entire family tree cut down by disease and time. The mathematical precision of the loss was almost supernatural in its cruelty. Every few years, another funeral, another graveside service, another night of playing blues that had become literally autobiographical. When his wife finally succumbed to the same disease that had taken their children, Bobby was left completely alone. The house that had once been filled with family conversations became a mausoleum of memories. Photographs on the mantelpiece became archaeological evidence of a life that had been systematically dismantled by genetics and inadequate medical care. He remarried, tried to rebuild, started again. But the universe wasn't finished with him. By 2008, he lost another son at just 18 years old to cancer. This wasn't sickle cell anemia. This was a different disease entirely, as if death was experimenting with new methods of torture. 18 years old. Barely old enough to vote, old enough to fight in a war, but not old enough to see his father's late career success. Each death should have broken him, but Bobby developed something more disturbing than grief: an immunity to loss. He convinced himself that tragedy made him stronger because the alternative, admitting that it was destroying him, was unthinkable.
I found a way to escape the lonesome days and the void of my children.
The language reveals everything. I found a way to escape. Not heal, not recover. Escape. Bobby survived by compartmentalizing grief so thoroughly that emotional numbness became his superpower. The 1990s brought a new kind of tragedy: criminal justice. He did a prison stint for unwittingly transporting a promoter's. The man who had spent decades avoiding and alcohol, a lifelong sober performer in an industry built on excess, found himself criminally implicated in a operation he knew nothing about.
I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't get high. I don't know why. It was all around me. I went in the room where guy had packets stacked up. Some blood, come on, it's free. Not for me. I don't know what happened.
The irony was devastating. While his contemporaries like Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf had built reputations around hard living and chemical excess, Bobby had deliberately chosen the straight path. He'd seen too many talented musicians destroy themselves with whiskey and heroin. His sobriety wasn't just moral choice, it was professional insurance policy. Clean artists could tour consistently, show up reliably, and maintain the stamina needed for 200-plus shows per year on the Chitlin Circuit. But in the music business, particularly the blues world of the 1980s and 90s, criminal activity often existed in the margins. Promoters who paid in cash, venues that operated without proper licensing, transportation arrangements that existed in legal gray areas. These were the realities of working outside the mainstream industry. Bobby depended on these networks because the legitimate music industry had essentially blacklisted him from major opportunities. Bobby's sobriety wasn't just personal choice, it was a survival strategy. He'd watched alcohol and drugs destroy blues legends, but staying clean couldn't protect him from other people's illegal activities. A promoter used his van to transport, and Bobby became legally responsible for cargo he didn't know existed. The prison sentence was devastating for someone who had built his entire career on reputation and trustworthiness. Club owners who had booked Bobby Rush for decades suddenly saw him as a liability. The Chitlin Circuit that had sustained him started viewing him as radioactive. When he was finally released, Bobby discovered that the music world had moved on without him. Younger blues artists had taken his spot on festival lineups. The relationships he'd built with venue owners had been permanently damaged by his criminal record. Starting over at age 60 with a felony conviction was like beginning his career again, but with additional barriers that hadn't existed in the 1950s. Then came the bus crash. On April 19th, Bobby Rush and his band were involved in a serious auto collision en route to their next gig in Pensacola, Florida. The van's driver suffered a heart attack, which caused him to lose control of the vehicle and hit a tree. Tragically, dancer Letitia Brown was killed instantly, and 9 other band members were hospitalized, including Bobby, who suffered head and neck injuries. Band member Letitia Brown was killed in the accident. Virtually every other band member suffered injuries, some serious, and several band members went or underwent surgery. The crash happened during a routine drive between gigs, the kind of trip Bobby had made thousands of times over 5 decades of touring. Letitia Brown was more than a bandmate. She was part of the Bobby Rush family that had replaced his biological family. Her death in that crash represented another person torn away from someone who couldn't afford to lose anyone else.
I think I got my strength from losing. Yeah, I had to find a way to dust myself off and get up. Yeah. I don't know where it comes from.
This wasn't wisdom, it was trauma response. Bobby had developed such familiarity with loss that he'd begun treating catastrophe as career preparation. In 2017, at the age of 83, Rush won his first Grammy Award in the category Best Traditional Blues Album for Porcupine Meat. 83 years old, after 6 decades of performing, recording, and touring, the music industry finally decided Bobby Rush deserved their highest honor. The Grammy ceremony itself was a study in institutional cruelty disguised as celebration. Bobby, using a walker and moving slowly across the stage, accepted an award that should have come in 1971 when Chicken Heads first proved his commercial viability. The standing ovation felt less like recognition and more like a collective guilty conscience trying to applaud away decades of systematic neglect. Consider the mathematics of this injustice. Bobby had been recording professionally since 1964. By 2017, that was 53 years of consistent output, innovation, and artistic evolution. He had influenced countless musicians, pioneered the folk-funk sound that bridged traditional blues and contemporary R&B, and maintained a touring schedule that would have killed performers half his age. Yet the industry's highest honor came when he was closer to death than to the prime of his creative powers. The timing wasn't coincidental, it was calculated. The Grammy Awards love a good lifetime achievement story, particularly when that lifetime is almost over. Dead artists can't make demands, can't criticize the industry that ignored them, can't point out the systemic racism that delayed their recognition for half a century. An 83-year-old Bobby Rush was the perfect recipient, grateful, harmless, and unlikely to use the platform for uncomfortable truths about industry exploitation.
God have blessed me to remember well. Dave, you know I have 419 songs. And today, I can recite at least 350 of those songs.
419 songs. 3.5 centuries worth of musical composition. And the Grammy came when most people would have been retired for 2 decades. The late recognition felt less like justice and more like mockery. Each of those 419 songs represented creative labor that had been systematically undervalued by an industry that profited from Black innovation while denying Black artists equal compensation and recognition. The cruel irony was that Bobby's memory remained sharp enough to recite 350 of those songs word for word, a living archive of musical genius that the industry had ignored for most of his career. His mind retained every lyric, every melody, every harmonica riff that had been deemed not quite mainstream enough or too niche for broad appeal, code words for too Black for white audiences. At 91, Bobby maintains performance energy that would exhaust musicians half his age. But this isn't vitality, it's survival mechanism. He literally cannot stop performing because performance is the only identity he has left after loss stripped away everything else. The high-energy stage show, complete with dancers and athletic movements that defy his age, represents a desperate attempt to prove he's still alive, still relevant, still worthy of the attention that was denied him for decades. The pandemic of 2020 hit Bobby at age 86, another near-death experience for someone who had already survived more catastrophes than most people could imagine. COVID-19 wasn't just a health threat. It was an existential crisis for a man whose entire sense of self depended on live performance and audience connection. Months of isolation for someone who had spent 70 years on stage felt like premature burial. Interviewers ask him for wisdom because they assume his survival equals enlightenment. But survival doesn't create wisdom. It creates endurance. Bobby has endured everything, but endurance isn't the same as healing. His responses reveal a man trapped in his own history, unable to imagine a future that isn't just an extension of past struggles. The wisdom he offers is really just institutionalized trauma, presented as life philosophy. During his renowned stage show, Bobby Rush frequently jumps high into the air, arms spread and legs tucked, only to land gracefully and return without a hitch to his dazzling routine. It's a move you might expect at a contemporary R&B show, but it's downright shocking when you realize that Rush is in his late 80s. The physicality isn't impressive, it's disturbing. A 91-year-old man jumping and dancing with the energy of someone 50 years younger suggests someone who cannot allow himself to age naturally, because aging means confronting mortality, and mortality means confronting all the losses he's never properly grieved. According to him, you can fall, but it's not okay to fall. When you don't get up, you can't live without hope. You can't live without hope. But hope for what? At 91, having lost virtually everyone he loved, having survived imprisonment, crashes, fires, disease, and industry exploitation. What exactly is Bobby hoping for? The tragedy is that he's still hoping for the recognition and respect that should have come 40 years ago. There's currently a musical in development called Slippin' Through the Cracks with sites on Broadway. Broadway producers want to turn his life into entertainment for paying audiences. The man who performed behind curtains to hide his blackness now faces the prospect of having his entire tragic life performed by actors for predominantly white theater audiences.
There's nothing new under the sun. People think about the changes and what have been through, how you make changes. Yeah, you make changes, but everything have changed.
This is the philosophical conclusion of a man who has lived long enough to watch the same patterns repeat across generations. The record labels changed names, the venues got upgraded, the technology evolved, but the fundamental power structures that exploited him in 1953 are still exploiting artists today. Bobby isn't optimistic about the future. He's just hoping the next inevitable crash won't hurt as much as all the previous ones. The tragedy of Bobby Rush at 91 isn't that he's poor or forgotten. The tragedy is that he's still performing, still jumping, still hoping, because stopping would mean confronting the fact that most of his life was spent surviving rather than living. He's become a performing machine whose only option is to keep running until the machine finally breaks down. At 91, Bobby Rush isn't living. He's still just surviving, one show at a time, one loss at a time, waiting for a soft landing that may never come. Anyway, that's it for this video, folks. Bye.